Hey there, CutieinCosplay here with another video. Today's video is going to be a continuation of stories involving my Nintendo consoles. I'm going to be trying to tell a story for each one of my Nintendo consoles. So this video continues that. Let's get into it. So for my first story, it's going to be one involving the N64. So this story is the time I stole from GameStop. Good times. So when I was younger, my mom used to drag me to stores and stuff, and one of those times we went to the mall, she was shopping for shoes, and she's one of those people that can just spend hours in a store. Just takes so long. So I asked if I could go to the GameStop that was across from the shoe store, and she was like, yeah, go for it, because I just annoy the crap out of her trying to leave. So she was definitely like, get out of here. I made my way over. I went in knowing that I wouldn't be able to buy anything because I had no money, but you know, looking is better than sitting in a store. A different store that you don't care about anything. What is important to the story is what I was wearing at the time, which was a baggy sweater and jeans with decent pockets. So I spent about 10 minutes or so just looking at all the used games, particularly for PS1, PS2, but nothing really caught my eye, so I was gonna head out when I spotted N64 games at the glass counter. So I was interested in those. I made my way over, and my little eye saw Conker's Bad Fur Day. I knew about this game because my siblings had rented it before, and I'd played the multiplayer mode with them, but I had never gotten to play the story mode, and so I wanted it, but there was an issue. I couldn't ask my mom for money because I couldn't buy it myself because it was a mature rated game, and I knew that my mom would also not accompany me in the store and buy this for me because of the mature rating. So my brain hatched a little plan. As I looked around, I noticed that I was the only customer in the store, and there was only one employee who had his back turned, conveniently, as he was putting away games into a locked drawer. The glass counter that had these games had 4 drawers, and each drawer had N64 games lined up with Conker sitting in the top drawer. So what I had in mind to grab this game was risky, but it was kind of now or never. I just had to go for it. I called out to the guy behind the counter. He turned around, saw me, greeted me, and he was just overall being friendly, asking how he could assist me, stuff like that. I calmly asked him if he could please pull out the top drawer so that I could see the second row of games underneath, because I couldn't see them very well, which was true. It's a little difficult to see them when they're being covered. He responded with, of course he would do that. So he pulls out the top drawer with the N64 games so that I can look at the second shelf. So the N64 games were exposed. They were sticking out of the counter. I pretended to keep looking at the second drawer, making it look like I was debating on what to get. And after maybe 15 seconds or so, the guy turns around again, and he just began doing the same task he was doing before I had interrupted him, so he's paying me no attention. And conveniently while he's doing this task, he's making quite a bit of noise since he's handling plastic CD cases, so that's when I knew that was my chance. I sucked in my tummy, got on my tippy toes, leaned on the counter to reach over, and I was just barely able to grab Conker super quickly. I put it in my back pocket, and then I covered it with my baggy sweater so you couldn't see anything. Which was just perfect. I wasn't done there though. For some reason I thought to myself oh no, he's going to see this bare spot. He's gonna know that Conker's missing. So I grabbed the game, that was next to Conker, and I tried to position it so that it didn't look like there was just an empty space. So after positioning that game to make it look like there isn't an empty space, I quietly returned to normal and just kind of resumed looking at the second row of games, and like that's when I started thinking to myself like, okay, how do I get out of this without like looking suspicious? So for about like another 30 seconds or so, I just keep browsing, and then I talk to him again. He turns around and I'm like, okay, I know what I want, but like I need to ask my mom for money. Is it okay if I just go and get her? And he's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll be right here when you come back. And he just closes the top drawer. So I felt pretty good. He hadn't noticed that a game was missing. I waved goodbye, walked away. Mission successful. After that, I kept my cool. I let my mom do her thing, shopping, didn't bother her for once. I got home and then I played Conker all night without anyone knowing what I did. And funny enough, my siblings just assumed that my mom bought us the game. I didn't go back to that GameStop for months because I was afraid of like that I'd get caught whenever they found out that Conker was missing and they'd check the cameras or something. But yeah, years later, looking back on this, I do feel bad for tricking that nice guy. He was very pleasant. He was just happy doing his job, trying to help a little kid out. But yeah, that is the story of how I got away with stealing a game at GameStop. So my next console, my next story involves my Game Boy Color. So this is the story of how I got my Game Boy Color. Now this is kind of like the black sheep of my handhelds, and I really don't have too many fond memories of it, and here's why. So as a kid growing up in the early 2000s, Pokemon was still very popular. It was on TV, other kids had Pokemon cards. I myself had some Pokemon cards too that had been passed down to me by like my older siblings that had grown out of it and they didn't really like it anymore. So yeah, I had some of the original first edition cards that are very expensive today, but back then they weren't. They were just old cards, and the new generation of Pokemon cards, that's what most kids wanted, so mine were kind of not great back then. So I knew this one kid at school who would trade things for Pokemon cards, and he asked me one day if I had any, and I was like, yeah, I do. So then he asked what would I want for them, like to trade. Of course, being the little gamer I was, I asked for games, and he began to tell me like what games he had, but I already had them, or I just wasn't interested in them. There was one thing he said though that interested me, and that was that he had a Game Boy Color that he was willing to trade for cards. I had the original Game Boy that I got from a garage sale, but I didn't have a Game Boy Color, so I was like, yeah, I want that. The next day, he brought his Game Boy, I brought some of my cards that I was willing to trade, and after he looked at them, he wanted 3 of them, which I remember 2, but not the third one so well. I know that I gave him a Zapdos, a Pikachu, and I think the last one was one of the Eevee transformations, but can't quite remember. But anyway, 3 cards for Game Boy Color sounded like a pretty good deal at the time to me. And after the trade, I took it home, I played all my Game Boy games on it, now in color, which was very neat at the time. But yeah, many years later, as we look at the prices of some of those original Pokemon cards, it just gives me such like a facepalm moment that I can't believe I did that. But yeah. What's even worse is that I don't remember what happened to any of my Pokemon cards. So one day I stopped caring about trading cards, and over the years I forgot about them. So yeah, I just didn't profit off of them, gave them away for things like this little guy. He reminds me, this Game Boy Color reminds me of my Pokemon cards, and it's a little painful to think that I used to have like rare cards like Charizard and I just lost them or traded them, you know? Bummer. But yeah, Game Boy Color story. So my last console and my last story involves the GameCube. So, I have a story on how I was able to save up enough money to buy a GameCube game with just school lunch money. In elementary school, I was one of the kids that didn't qualify for free food at lunch break during school. So if I wanted to eat, I had to either bring my own lunch or buy my food at the cafeteria, and my parents would give me lunch money for school every day. So that was all good, and for the most part I always used money for food. But there was one day, I forget who told me, but one kid in class was telling everyone that there was a game store a couple blocks behind the school near a gas station. Little me was excited to see this new game store, and I didn't live that far from the elementary school, and also already I would walk home from school, so one day I just decided to go look for the game store after school. I remember I got lost for a couple of minutes, but eventually I found the gas station the kid had mentioned, and sure enough, the game store was across from the gas station. I walked up to the game store, went inside. I saw tons of games all lined up on the walls and sitting behind glass counters. There were a few people in there, so the employees were pretty busy helping them, and I just kind of kept to myself and was looking at the GameCube section, and there it was. I saw a game that was calling to me, and that was Zelda 4 Swords, but it was $50. So that's when I knew what I had to do. I quickly left the store. I went back to school from there. I made my way home. At my house, I got my notebook out and I made a list of days that I went to school and added up how many days it would take to get to $55 if I saved all of my lunch money. So after my calculations, it was 2 weeks and 1 day. So starting on the next Monday, I would skip lunch and save every $5 that my parents gave me for food. I did find it to be tough at times, I would get hungry, but I really wanted that game, so I stayed strong. Then fast forward 2 weeks, and on the second Friday, I had $45, but I was getting a little impatient. It's a lot of time for a kid. So that morning, when my dad gave me $5, I asked if I could have another $5 for ice cream after school. When I was coming home, because sometimes the ice cream would just pass by on that route, because who wouldn't go to a school to sell ice cream? But yeah, so lucky for me, I got an extra $5 that day, and I had $55. So there I was, ahead of schedule. I just had to make it through 1 day of school, and then I could go buy my game. But man, that day just dragged on. It seemed like that school day would just never end. But eventually that magical school bell chime rang out, and I ran to that game store as fast as I could. When I got there and went inside, I was breathing pretty hard because I've been running there excited. So I remember the man asked if I was okay, and I just pointed to the Zelda game. And I remember he looked confused, but he understood. That's all he needed. He knew what I wanted. He grabbed the game, I took off my backpack, and I gave him all the money I had, and he looked at my little hand with a wad of $5s. I could see that his face was it still looked confused because I handed him a ton of $5s, but it was enough money, so. He gave me my change, handed me my game, and that is the story of how I got Zelda 4 Swords for the GameCube and saved up my money with school lunch money. Later on, my older siblings bought extra Game Boy adapters so that we could all play co-op with the Game Boys, so that was fun. But that was the story of saving up my money for a game, you know? So that was 3 more stories involving 3 more of my Nintendo consoles. As always, let me know in the comments if you guys have any stories with Nintendo consoles, maybe these particular 3 or any console. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!